Okay, we're going to start again. So my name is Ian Baird. I'm the coordinator of the Hmong Studies Consortium at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we're privileged today to have Tou SaiK Lee as our speaker. I was privileged to have him as an advisee when he was studying here at the University of Wisconsin, but I also learned a great deal from him when he was here. So I feel like it was more mutual learning than a one-way learning experience. So typically, Tou SaiK is based in Minnesota, but presently he's actually in Phayao province in northern Thailand, where he's joining us now. So I'll introduce him now. Tou SaiK Lee has an MA in Southeast Asian Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he focused on Hmong language and culture. He is a hip-hop artist, a storyteller, and a spoken word poet. He is also a community faculty member at the College of Liberal Arts at Metropolitan State University in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, where he teaches about worldview through Hmong language. He is strongly influenced by Indigenous language and culture revitalization efforts, including creative approaches such as community story exchanges that honor the knowledge of traditional practitioners. He also advocates for reviving language and culture in ways that are relevant and engaging to new generations of learners. In addition, Tou SaiK facilitates the Spicy Legacy Project, an intergenerational arts residency that brings together youth and elders from particular communities, including the Hmong community in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. He collaborates and guides the process, which culminates in community performances inspired by his own groundbreaking collaborative work with his grandmother, Yua Chang. So, Tou SaiK, why don't you share your screen and take it away?
Nhớ rong số lần số tù rong share the nature the gong ping no or mono I'm gonna share my screen and I'm gonna go right into it. Like, welcome everybody, thank you for being here, and I'm gonna definitely leave time for questions too, so feel free to take notes, ask questions. All right, here we go with the share. All right.
You haven't shared yet.
Okay.
Oh, here it comes.
Oh yeah. Is it okay? I think hopefully
yeah, there it is.
The internet holds up. No, I'm in well, you just never know when you're in the mountainous regions. Okay, no, I'm actually not in the mountain right now, but all right. One day của xã hội我找到那时的我找到在八股那股给 truffle 那些 I want to thank you to those who helped support my research. University of Wisconsin-Madison, Hmong Consortium, Southeast Asian Southeast Asian Studies, but particularly in being able to receive the Hmong Social Justice Fund for me to do my research, and then my committee members who are my master's paper, Dr. Prasidli Picha, Dr. Micah Morton, and Ian, Dr. Ian, who is my advisor. All my fellow researchers, peer researchers, Ho Tao Cheng, Bang Ya Yang from Chiang Mai University, Bao Xiang, Ake, Russell, Makana, and more. And well, I'm just gonna go right into it because this is an academic, but it's not a defense. I'm just presenting. So I'm gonna have academic terminology and presentation, but I'm also going to just talk through it as if I'm just explaining to you what my research is. Okay. So this is how I'm gonna start off, because this is what got me into it, right? Hip hop, and how grandma and I perform together as a duo, and how I'm connecting our oral traditions to what I do in contemporary times, and how am inspired by Indigenous people embracing their Indigenous languages, their Indigenous cultures through hip hop. Right. So that's actually the foundation of how I got into all of this. So it's like Tall Paul, who's an Indigenous artist on the top left there, to Superman, who's also an Indigenous artist that engages in hip hop, to the South American group on the bottom right there, who rap in Quechua as a way to revitalize their language in Ecuador. So these are my inspirations to really get into it. And I'm gonna go to the next slide. I really want to honor the being from the Midwest and all the Native communities that I've interacted with, and especially like inspired by the Winding the Circle symposium in La Crosse, Wisconsin, created by Matthew Stewart and Song Shum, which really opened my world to connecting to Indigenous people as Hmong people, because we would do, collaboratively do these conferences together. And my fellowship, my Bush fellowship, where I got to travel and engage with Hmong communities in different parts of the world, where I could interact and find commonalities through the arts and preserving culture and language in Thailand, Vietnam, China, and Australia. Well, cool. Well, just starting off with the methodology piece, it is semi-structured, but mostly qualitative research. And these are the villages that I focused on in Thailand. Hoi Ku Hoi Han, which is closer to Chiang Rai province on Puchifa Mountain. And then Payao, which is the flatland village, which is where I'm at now. Ba Kinya and village Zhao village 12, as well as Chiang Mai, and focusing on villages Ba Kia, which is Bang Ya's village, and Mesa Mai. And kind of going to give you distinctions with that, but definitely thank you to Chiang Mai University and the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations that are Indigenous advocating and led, which is Impact and AIPP, which also happens to be in Chiang Mai. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of set the foundation for my research. I just want to start off with the distinction of Hmong Chia, Hmong Go, okay, the original Hmong and the new Hmong. So the original Hmong are the Hmong that like when they migrated from China, many of them went straight to Thailand and have been there even before Thailand established its borders as a nation state. And so they're more, the descendants they call themselves more like the Mongol, the original Hmong. And a lot of them are living in the villages near Chiang Mai a lot more, such as Bakia and Mesa. The new Hmong are actually a lot of us Hmong Americans are more familiar with, which is the ones that were from Blote because of Paul. So when war happened, those who escaped into Thailand and didn't get resettled in other parts of the world, they stayed in Thailand. Those are mostly considered Hmong Chia, right? And I did get comments about, there's actually other Hmong there too, besides these two groups, but these are the two main groups that I focused on interviewing. But there's groups that came from Vietnam, there's groups that came after the Hmong Chia. So the Hmong Chia are not actually that new. They've been there for 50 years, just like how we've been in America for 50 years. So, but they still distinguish themselves with those two categories. And so it is temporal, it's time-wise, the time frame that they migrated or ran there as refugees, and also spatial in the sense of certain locations, certain villages in Thailand have mostly Hmong Po, the original Hmong, or Hmong Chia, right? So one of the frameworks that I'm gonna just start off with was the translocal assemblages. And that's where there is, well, I'm gonna go all throughout cultural linguistics, connecting social memory, and then transnational alienation that connects to diasporic identity. So these are the three I focus on, and I'm gonna go into all three of them. But so just to start, my thesis for my master's studies was Hmong people in Thailand have diverse understandings of indigeneity, influenced by factors such as generational perspective, lived or educated in close proximity to indigenous-led non-governmental organizations, NGOs, networks, and which era of migration their familial lineage identifies with. So just basically, how do they identify connecting to the indigenous identity depending on their situation? All right. And I just want to set the foundation for just the indigenous identity in general. And I think that there are multiple ways of defining who is indigenous, but these are just taken from, the United Nations Declaration of Rights for Indigenous People, as well as the IWGIA, the International Work Group of International Affairs, Amnesty International. These are just some foundational characteristics, but there are definitely more, and there's some indigenous people that don't meet these characteristics. One of the most important ones that I'll just start with, even though it's on the bottom, was how they self-identify as indigenous people, and we'll get more into that. But strong link to the environment and surrounding natural resources, distinct language and culture beliefs that are distinct from the dominant, right? So how Hmong people may have their own language in distinction to Thai, those in Thailand. They're marginalized and discriminated by the state, maintain and develop ancestral environments as distinctive people, possess crucial knowledge on how to manage natural resources and act as guardians for those. Considered nationless people who live without borders. Indigenous people are also known as first people, can be known as first people, sorry. And it's expanded to the definition where indigenous people were mostly who are also displaced and forced to migrate due to persecution and war. So this translocal assemblages, it is like creating different networks, and it's usually on different levels. So the way that I see it with Hmong, for example, is on the village with the Hmong in Thailand, the village level, where there is connection, there is belonging, and there's kind of movement. And then they're also flexible to on a national, where they're building coalition with other ethnicities, indigenous group, others who experience discrimination. And then there's global level, where you can either see it, you perceive it as Hmong people connecting with the international indigenous peoples movement, or the Hmong diaspora, which we'll get more into. So translocal, it has anything, and it's ways to create movement on these different levels, but then be more flexible, not be so rigid, and like they have to be certain rules that they have to stick with. And these are just some characteristics of it. Okay, so knowledge, cultural and linguistic identity, and then resilience and solidarity. With this, there's a community of belonging. So especially those who may experience similar discrimination, even though they may be different cultures. And especially Impact has a really great example of that, with initially different indigenous groups that lived in the mountains, or hill tribe groups, coming together to advocate for their rights and build coalition. And to self-identify as indigenous and creating their own term, and I'll get into that. Self-identifying And with the support of NGOs, these leaders within different indigenous groups came together and created a term, which there was multiple terms, but the term that they adopted, that they also is used politically within Thailand, is Chun Pao, which is means tribal peoples in. Okay, I'm not gonna pronounce this because I'm not fluent in Thai. Pun Muang, which is in reference to those who have been in the country, like Itzunyang, they can, have been in the country, like in reference to being indigenous or first peoples. I guess that's shift from that. And the cultural, in reference to cultural hybridity, it is about the way that I perceive it is it's having your own unique culture, but then also building solidarity and finding similarity to other cultures. And so there's a nuance of exchange where you find similarity with, like, for example, in Minnesota, we may find similarities with the Pakinyao people or Karen people, but we know that they're their own people, their own language, and they have different cultural practices, right? And I think for me, that concept of cultural hybridity was, for me, significant in the way that I observed Hmong people talking about other cultures, or like they'll always reference like Lu Haining, Toshia, like, oh, they're similar to us, but they're also different. Right? And this is actually the Indigenous Peoples Movement concert. Wait. Oh, and I was just showing, this is a photo of Mesa Mai, and the concert was on the left there. And I think I'm just making comparisons like from the village to like coming together and interacting more on a larger scale, more covered by media, and more outspoken about their solidarity. Okay. One significant moment that a lot of participants I interviewed talked about was how those indigenous who identify as indigenous or identify as Chun Pao or like ethnic minorities within Thailand, those who are in political office were representing their cultural clothing in parliament. And that was also very shunned and very, there was a lot of controversy that they felt they weren't respectful by not wearing the usual attire in parliament, but by wearing their cultural attire. But on the flip side, those who I interviewed said it gave them hope to see visibility of their culture be represented in parliament. Oh, this was the conference of the Indigenous Peoples Conference that I attended, where there was a concert. And there was young people, like a lot of youth leaders, like Indigenous Peoples Youth Network there documenting. And then also on that top right is a group. So they're not just including, because I think a lot of Indigenous people, the Indigenous movement is really known initially for the people that are in the mountains, but it is now including people who are also in the flatland or even southern Thailand. So there's an ethnic group on the top right there who are doing language revitalization efforts and also exchanging their resources and adapting it with other ethnic groups. And that's the advantage of building coalition and cultural hybridity, is being able to share resources and adapt them. And there's the concert where they all came together, documented. And those who know me know that I'm a musician, and that like Hmong, people coming together through music is something that I really feel strong about and connected to. So for me, I was an observer, but it was a beautiful thing to observe. Um, so next is cultural linguistics, and thinking about that I primarily interviewed in the Hmong language, those who are Hmong in the villages and those who work for NGOs. Um, and I only used English when I interviewed other people from other cultures who speak English. And I had someone who is translating in Thai help out for those that only spoke Thai. In that, I'm gonna break down the connection of language, but through this concept, it is how language shapes cultural perception, and um, distinguishing it from Western concepts of indigenous and Western ways of seeing the world is really getting down to the cultural perspective through language. So I just wanted this quote from the researcher Sherifan. Says that words we use can change how we think about our culture. Language affects the way we see the world. So thinking about Hmong ways of explaining identity are unique to our culture. So I also want to connect cultural linguistics to social memory. And this becomes significant because I was tracking, while I was interviewing a lot of Hmong participants, I was kind of tracking what words they kept repeating that have a distinction or similarity or distinction to going back to the indigenous characteristics that I referenced earlier in the presentation. So I did a lot of documenting certain words that reference indigenous characteristics and how much it was repeated by the participants. So that's what I'm connecting to with social memory, or also social memory is a term that derives from collective memory, which a lot of those who might know is about a group of people who may have historical memories, shared historical memories, especially if it's memories of trauma or memories of resilience. And in our case, the Hmong people, that is the case of resilience, discrimination, and trauma. And so this shared social memory is what I want to reference when I go through my analysis of language within my interviews. And just really thinking about how Hmong preserve oral histories intergenerationally, and how they use ceremony and oral traditions that pass on from generation to generation. They're passing on that social memory, right? So it doesn't have to be from someone who experienced that trauma or experienced that discrimination, like Hmong people that were experienced from the era of Hotaijiya, or from the era or King Chiu to the era of Bajai Bu. Just because we hear those stories are passed on to us, so we continue to carry on those feelings of being marginalized through that understanding of history through storytelling and oral tradition. So, so these are just some examples for now. There's a lot more. There's an entire list, but I'm just, for the sake of time, I'm only going to share a few. So this first one, being people who are colonized, and this is a term that I heard the most is 盖住, like 什么被盖住不头, like, or 头被根骨. So they just reference how Hmong people have been dominated or colonized. It's a reference. It could be a reference to other words too, but in this context, being colonized, and not just colonized in the sense of how we see as Americans, how Europeans came and colonized the United States, but how we're internally colonized, like in China, where we had already lived there and with other ethnicities, but we were colonized because they created a nation state, built borders around us, and wanted us to assimilate. So this is something that was repeated. And Tou is go against, go against something authoritative, you go against something that they feel is trying to dominate them. So these terms do go together, but I'm just going to go through them separately for now. And Yuxia is in a way because especially those in Thailand thinking about their freedom to just roam and farm and have financially provide for their families, they feel that they're very restricted in Thailand from a lot of the interviews. And some of them that go work in the city and try to make money actually will come back and they'd rather just work in places that they can live freely, even if it's a little less, and work with their families. And these are just examples on the right here of collective memory or social memory in reference to this every term. So goodbye is, there's a loan word right there where bye is a Lao Thai word, but gu, it means carry. Right? And goodbye mutaja, so carry to go protest, carry signs to go protest. So it's a reference to go protest. Muhai blondo is another way that we would say it. But goodbye is a reference, right? You already know that what that's about protesting when you hear that term. And then I've mentioned this already, Ningtoshia, other people who live in the mountains. And that's a way that a lot of Hmong people that I interviewed reference being in solidarity or being similar, because they reference other people who live in the mountains with them, but they also, there's a connotation that they're also experiencing the same discrimination as they are. And so, okay, so sometimes they will collaborate to advocate, whether it's on a smaller scale to advocate for their land rights or to advocate on a larger scale with the indigenous peoples movement there, that they see them as allies. So they always use Ningtoshia. And that actually is the closest word I would say to what we would refer to as indigenous, but it doesn't represent Hmong people who live, who are not Hmong people, tribal people or ethnic people who don't live in the mountains, also experience similar discrimination. So it doesn't cover all of the groups. So Ningtoshia wouldn't be the term that would be indigenous for Hmong. Wait, go to the next. So now I want to reference transnational alienation and diasporic identity, especially digital. I should put that word in there, digital diasporic identity. But and these concepts I want to reference because it's generational. That's why I put like me interviewing an elder, as well as me interacting with, these are actually a band in Pakia, the village, and interviewing younger people, young adults, I should say, and getting their perspective on this concept. So let's go into the concept of transnational alienation. And I put, it's an identity that a lot of OGs carry, which is like, or like not having a country, wanting a country. And being, meaning like being minorities and feeling like homeless orphans. And this is something that Gary Elia had referenced as a concept to Hmong mentality during those generations, and this feeling like we're discriminated because we are homeless, because we don't have a country. So that's where that comes from, right? As we feel like by having a country, we may not feel discriminated. Now, I know that's a very controversial topic and it comes up on social media all the time. This is why Hmong people don't have a country every time there's a conflict between Hmong people. I just want to reference that. But I just want to go to the root of it, right? That whole idea of Hmong people not having a country. Like making sure I track my time. Okay. So some terms that Hmong people call themselves, which I've mentioned a few times, meaning the minority, people who are have less in numbers within a dominant country. Especially in Thailand, in this sense. Is Hmong people who live along the borders. And so a lot of the older generation of Hmong in Thailand will call themselves Ningkiete or call other hill tribes Ningkiete, meaning because they lived along the borders, because they always felt like if they were going to be persecuted, that they can easily cross the borders. especially through the mountains. So not crossing at the official entryways, which they won't be allowed to cross, but knowing the terrain enough to cross into other countries, but then feeling this sense of that they may be persecuted and displaced at any time. So this is why they call themselves people at the border. And to really reference this whole borders and the impact of borders, and this is something that Dr. Prasit Lee has referenced before, is that we tend to take on the identity of the people, the country that we live the borders within. So among Americans, the way that we see our successes here, but we also may look down on Hmong people in other countries because they have less or because they're not as successful. Some people are like that, not all. Is a way that we've taken on the Hmong American identity. Like looking at other Hmong in other countries like they're lower is a mentality that we adopted from the countries that we live in. And but Dr. Prasit even referenced how Hmong people in Thailand will look down on Hmong people in Laos, because Hmong Laos economy is less developed. So they take on that same mentality of Thai people looking down on Lao people. So I think that is, and it's just something to be aware of as Hmong people, that we just take on the mentality of the countries that we live in. But I know that we want to also be a part of and have belongings. Like we want to be Hmong Americans, considered Americans, for example. But does that mean we get to a point where we look down on other the same countries Americans look down on? I think that's where we can be a little more critical. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be just presenting, but that's just my personal thoughts. All right. So the diasporic identity piece that I think is very important for me, just thinking about global networks, like even during the 80s, Hmong people were already exchanging DVDs and CDs, right? Internationally, right? So we're exchanging letters, we're exchanging cassette tapes, and then we were already watching videos on DVD and CDs, listening to cassette tapes from Hmong people from other parts of the world. They were listening to ours. So there was always an exchange. And now with the digital era, it's a lot more accessible, right? You could just go on YouTube or just go on our different social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, to access content from Hmong people in other parts of the world. So it becomes a more of a digital diaspora. And so for a lot of the younger generation, they find some belonging, even though there's still some issues and conflicts and division between Hmong on social media from other countries, but you access them a lot easier now, and you can listen to their music and you can message them more in real time. And I think that whereas one generation had transnational alienation, feeling homeless or displaced or feeling not belonging, I think that there's a long distance nationalism as a concept that I wanted to just put out there, is that we find an identity in globally with other Hmong people, right? And when we visit other countries, we interact with them. Like if we visit Vietnam, we interact with Hmong people in Vietnam. We share that language, or France, for example. And so, so for me, it's just showing that there's a shift in seeing more a sense of belonging with some people who choose to find belonging with other Hmong in other parts of the world by having an easier access to them through digital media. Okay. And I wanted to, this last concept coming from the linguistic piece is tự trả, right? Which I connect to Indigenous resistance. and reading about Indigenous resistance, it is being able to resist oh, this is a group of the Hmong CPT, Hmong Communist Party of Thailand, who resisted um, dominance or Gaichu from the Thai government. And there was an earlier picture of Giao Pha, which I didn't verbally reference, who also has their own history of resistance, right? And for me, it's making that parallel, that connection, that indigenous resistance. It's not just about armed resistance, which I'm referencing the Hmong CPT and Gaichu and Giao Pha, but it's also a resistance to assimilation, right? Being the Tấn Giao to like Long Wu Lửa Hải Ninh, right? So we always have been resistant to assimilation, and that's a part of the idea of indigenous resistance is resisting assimilation to the dominant culture and having that self-determination to do that. And I think that that's a part of the going back to social memory, like knowing hearing these stories of your people experiencing this discrimination, and then wanting to have a resilience to continue on with your language and culture because of you learned that history, right? And so for me, that's why I feel that concept of indigenous resistance is transformative. And like I said, it's not just about survival, it's about challenging the system. And so why apply indigenous methods to Hmong language revitalization? Now I'm getting into what I'm doing now, or what I'm getting into at Metro State University, but I also taught at one of the Hmong charter schools for a semester to really try to not just teach about history and language, but to actually make a connection to our history and how that gives them context and motivation to why they should be learning the language or the history. So, so for the most part, that's like setting the foundation for that, right? Why they're even learning it, what gives them motivation, because a lot of students, they go in not understanding why they need to learn Hmong language anymore or learn Hmong history anymore if they're in a different society where they're trying to just earn a living, right? So connected to capitalism, right? So for me, just thinking about it holistically and building resilience in them, and then also connecting it to by learning language and culture and history, it's connected to healing, like intergenerational healing, right? Generational trauma healing, right? And so for me, it's through different ideas of how we can really not just teach them, but give them an understanding of why it's important to learn. And so setting that foundation, I'm going to get into the different methods and actual things that were applied. But for me, it was centering that historical narrative, those voices, creating more of a worldview, diasporic worldview, not just an American worldview of our culture and identity. So that's why me doing research on Hmong in Thailand, like I could have done research on Hmong in other parts of the world too. It's just that I had more connections in Thailand, but that we make sure we understanding their culture, growing up in their part of the world too, and how they see their identity and how we connect. So for me, it's really dismantling the Western worldview of our culture, our own identity, which a lot of us may have. And so, and also just even if they want to look through an Hmong American lens, but they're also able to shift, and like a two-eyed seeing is an indigenous concept of being able to shift and see a worldview too, not an indigenous worldview too, not just the Western worldview, but being able to have that hybrid of shifting, like code switching. And then building community partnerships. I think that me having a foot in community, doing so much nonprofit community work for so many years, just naturally making that connection to now teaching and then having my students collaborate with like the Hmong Cultural Center or Hmong American Farmers Association or SIA Arts, and being able to create more applying what they're learning and their knowledge they're learning in class and can make connecting to those in community and creating actual projects that they can make a difference in is and bringing in cultural experts, bringing in elders, bringing in those who like play different instruments, those who have knowledge of Hmong food and farming and oral traditions to interact with students. Sometimes it's bringing them in as speakers, sometimes it's bringing the students to them. But these are foundational aspects of engaging with students to learn about, and not just mostly Hmong students, but even students of other cultures who are wanting to learn about Hmong, that we engage them in these foundational tenets. Yeah, so this is just an example of what I'm doing, you know, like Bang Seng Yang, who is a part of the Hmong panel, also taught Lu Za workshop where you know, people were learning more about her Hmong poetry chanting from the Hmong dialect. The controversy about green and Hmong, that was there. I just want to like reference that. And the Hmong shaman panel, engaging with Hmong American Farmers Association and Hmong Cultural Center, SIA Arts. And there was more too. And Diane Garvey teaching them about not just how to make Hmong food, but like the foundational reasons why it was important to preserve and understanding how healthy Hmong food is and how it can actually help us now that we are here in this country and eating a lot of foods that may not be the healthiest for us, to bring back our traditional ways of eating and using our produce, right, or produce from other farmers too. Actually, if don't have the capacity to, that you're supporting other farmers by using it, which in turn you become more healthier, right? Or utilizing them as ingredients. And I just want to say thank you, 我赚到 to all the participants who I interviewed and who were open to interviewing me. And so I'm actually here visiting family, but one of the goals I have is to return and show my research participants the actual results of the research. And it's mostly visual and me just explaining it to them in Hmong. You know, I'm not gonna print out my master's paper and hand it to them, but I'm just gonna explain it to them. So I was able to engage and explain to some of my participants coming back here to Thailand and getting their feedback and their interactions with it. And one of the reasons is I was called out. It wasn't actually, they didn't call me out. They just called out in general people who are researchers from academia who come and do research in the villages, and then they just never see them again. Like they just take the information and they never hear from them again. And so one of the leaders of the Hmong village was calling out all the academic researchers out, and he said, "Are you coming back?" And I was like, "Yes, I am." so that's part of the reason I'm coming back. I might take a few trips though, because there's actually a lot of people I interviewed. I just want to end with this quote, and then we'll go right into Q&A, which is, "Learning Hmong language can set free pathways of seeing the world that's been disillusioned to be subconscious and confined within borders of colonial perspectives. Coded words unraveled within a communal environment can reconcile loss of identity and reconnect with rooted conversations between generations that allow transmission of ancestral knowledge. Hip hop in the Hmong language is a captivating adaptation of oral tradition that revives nostalgic sounds of historic resilience and amplifies contemporary messages of cultural relevance." And so it is referencing preservation, but also referencing revitalization. And I'm someone who advocates for both. Like, I love tradition the way it is, but I love the way that new ideas are bringing light to our cultural traditions and our history, so, in our language. So that's it. that's my presentation. And feel free to ask questions.
You want popcorn or should we raise our hands?
You know, that's a really good facilitating this on Zoom is yeah, that's thank you. Can we start
unshare your screen?
with you? Huh? Oh yeah,
Unshare your
good
screen.
idea. To facilitate well, who NTU, how do you pronounce it?